They say Wyoming doesn't raise the weak, it buries them. And if you survive, if you're still standing when the frost comes and the wind cuts like a blade through your bones, then the land doesn't just shape you, it claims you. It writes its name across your chest where no one can see it, and from that moment forward, you belong to something wilder than blood, older than memory, harder than stone. Lena Carter was 17 years old, and Wyoming had claimed her completely. She lived alone on 8 acres of raw, unforgiving land at the edge of a place nobody remembered to put on maps anymore, Dustfall Ridge. A crooked wooden cabin that her father had built with his own hands, a rusted truck that barely started in the cold, a rifle above the door, a hunting knife on her belt, and a silence so deep and so permanent that sometimes she woke at 3 in the morning just to make sure the world hadn't ended while she slept. Her father, Ray Carter, had died 14 months ago. A logging accident. Quick, merciful in its speed, if not in its aftermath. He had left her the land, the cabin, the truck, and a set of skills that most grown men didn't have. He had taught her to track deer through snow, to read the sky before a storm, to fix an engine with nothing but wire and patience, and to face the dark without flinching. "Fear is a fire, Lena," he used to say, crouching beside her in the early morning woods, his breath making small clouds in the cold air. "It'll warm you if you respect it. It'll burn you alive if you run from it." She never ran. After he died, the county sent a social worker twice. Both times, Lena answered the door calmly, showed her hunting license, her food stores, her school transcripts. She taught herself online. And both times, after a long, uncertain pause, they left. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't broken. She was simply a girl who had been taught to stand on her own feet, and she was doing exactly that. The nearest town was 40 minutes by road. She went once a month for supplies. She spoke to almost no one. She counted the seasons by the movement of elk across the ridge, and she marked the days not by loneliness, but by the quiet, sacred satisfaction of survival. This was her life, and she did not know it was about to change forever. It was the 3rd week of October when it happened. The temperature had dropped hard that day, the kind of sudden cold that arrives like a punishment, not a warning. Lena had spent the afternoon checking her fence line, cutting wood, and reinforcing the cabin's eastern wall where the wind came through in thin, freezing whispers. By nightfall, she was tired, and she sat by the fire with a book open in her lap and a rifle leaning against the chair beside her. She wasn't reading, she was listening. That was a habit the mountains had given her. The wilderness speaks in a language most people have forgotten how to hear. A shift in wind, the sudden silence of birds, the way snow settles differently when something heavy is moving nearby. Lena had learned every syllable of that language. At 9:10, the wolves started. Not howling, that was normal. This was different. This was the frantic, overlapping sound of a pack in pursuit, a hunting frenzy. And it was close, 1/2 mile, maybe less. Moving fast. Then she heard something underneath it. A human voice. A man's voice. Not screaming. That would have told her he'd already lost. This was a voice fighting, cursing, grunting, the raw, desperate sounds of someone refusing to go down without a war. Lena was out the door in 30 seconds. She didn't pause to think about danger. She didn't calculate the risk. She grabbed a rifle, her flashlight, and her father's old hunting jacket, and she ran toward the sound the way he had always told her a person of character should run, toward the thing that needs you, not away from it. The trail through the eastern pine grove was a 1/4 mile of rough ground, and she covered it in 4 minutes. When she broke through the tree line into the small clearing beside the creek bed, her flashlight swept across a scene that stopped her breath cold. A man, on the ground, his back against a boulder, one arm held up to protect his face, the other gripping a hunting knife. Blood on his jacket, blood on the snow. 3 wolves circling him with the slow, terrible patience of creatures who know they have already won. Lena raised the rifle. The first shot split the air like a thunderclap, striking the ground 2 feet from the nearest wolf. A warning, not a kill. She didn't want to kill them. They were doing what wolves do. But the second shot, closer still, combined with her voice, sharp, commanding, filling the clearing like she owned every inch of it, sent them scattering into the dark. Silence. Then the man let out a long, shaking breath and collapsed sideways into the snow. Lena was already moving toward him. His name was Cole. She didn't know that yet as she knelt beside him, pressing her gloved hands to the wound in his side, assessing the damage with the calm, focused eyes of someone who had patched up animals and once sewn her own forearm closed after a barbed wire accident. He was big, broad-shouldered, heavily built, wearing a leather vest over a riding jacket with a patch she couldn't quite read in the flashlight beam, tattoos up his neck, a jaw like something carved out of the same stone as the mountains around them. He was also, she realized quickly, losing too much blood. "Stay with me," she said, not a request, a command. His eyes opened, dark eyes, pain-glazed but aware. He looked at her with the expression of a man who genuinely could not understand what he was seeing. A 17-year-old girl, alone in the Wyoming wilderness at night, kneeling in the snow beside him like she belonged there. "You're a kid," he managed. "And you're bleeding on my mountain," she replied. "So let's move." Getting him back to the cabin was the hardest thing she had done since burying her father. He was 6'2" and solid as timber, and he could barely stand. She got his arm across her shoulders and half carried, half walked him through the pine grove in the dark, talking to him the whole time, not to comfort him, but to keep him conscious. She told him the names of the trees they were passing, the distance remaining, the temperature. She focused on facts, because facts were anchors. Feelings could come later. Inside the cabin, she cleaned the wound, stitched what needed stitching with the same steady hands her father had trained, and wrapped him properly. She made broth. She stoked the fire until the room was warm enough to stop the shivering. And sometime around midnight, Cole opened his eyes again, clearer this time, and looked at her across the orange glow of the fire. "Cole," he said, "Iron Brotherhood, MC." He said it simply, without bravado, the way a man gives his name and his home in the same breath. "Lena," she said, "Dustfall Ridge." And somehow, in those few words, something passed between them, a recognition of 2 people who understood what it meant to belong to a hard and unforgiving place. Over the next hour, in short, careful sentences, he told her enough. He was a road captain for the Iron Brotherhood, a motorcycle club with deep roots and deeper loyalties. He had been ambushed on the highway 20 miles south. A rival gang, the Black Vultures, had run him off the road, taken his bike, and left him for dead. He had walked through the wilderness for 6 hours before the wolves found him. The Black Vultures weren't just going to leave it there. They would be looking for him. And now, Cole said quietly, his dark eyes serious and direct, he had to warn her. They might find this place. Lena looked at the fire. She thought about her father. She thought about what he had said about fear being a fire. Then she looked back at Cole. Let him. They came on the second night. 3 Black Vulture riders, slow and deliberate up the ridge road, headlights cutting through the dark like something predatory. Lena had seen them coming for 20 minutes. She had eyes on every approach to the property, a habit of survival, and she had used every one of those 20 minutes wisely. Cole was in no condition to fight. She had made that clear, and he had accepted it with the reluctant dignity of a man who knew she was right. But he had also, despite her instructions, dragged himself to the window with his back against the wall and his hand on the knife. "You don't have to do this," he told her. "I know," she said. "I want to." She stood on the porch in the cold. No flashlight, no visible weapon, just a girl in a hunting jacket, standing in the dark, looking at 3 men who had stopped their bikes at the edge of her property line. The one in front, heavy-set with a scarred jaw, leaned forward on his handlebars. "We're looking for someone," he called out. "This is private land," Lena said. Her voice was level. Her heartbeat was not, but her father had taught her that the voice belongs to your will, not your heartbeat, and she had believed him. You're already trespassing. The man's eyes moved slowly across the cabin, the property, the girl. You're alone out here? I have a rifle, a radio connected to the county sheriff, and 8 acres of territory I know better than my own face, she said, and you have about 30 seconds to decide if I'm someone you want to push. A long silence. The wind moved through the pines. Somewhere far back in the dark, a wolf called once. The 3 men looked at each other. They left. She waited until the sound of their engines had completely disappeared before she let herself breathe again. Then she leaned against the porch post, closed her eyes, and quietly allowed her heart to pound as hard as it needed to. Behind her, through the window, she heard Cole exhale. "Wolf girl," he said softly, almost to himself. She didn't know it then, but those 2 words were already traveling. Cole had a radio, a small emergency device that the Iron Brotherhood had equipped every senior member with, keyed to a private frequency. He had managed to send a compressed burst signal during the night, his location, his status, and a name. Lena Carter, Dustfall Ridge, she saved me. That was enough. On the morning of the 3rd day, Lena was outside splitting wood when she heard it. Far away at first, a deep, layered sound that she felt in her sternum before she consciously identified it. She stopped, set down the axe, turned toward the ridge road, and then she saw them. They came over the rise like a tide, a long, powerful column of motorcycles, chrome glinting in the pale morning sun, engines speaking in a voice that rolled across the valley like controlled thunder. Leather vests, road-worn faces, men and women who had ridden through the night from 4 different states to reach a forgotten ridge in Wyoming because one of their brothers had needed them. 112 Iron Brotherhood members. Lena stood in the yard and watched them come, and for the first time since her father's funeral, something cracked open in her chest. Not grief this time, but something she had almost forgotten the feeling of. The column stopped. The engines fell quiet. Cole had limped outside behind her. She heard his boots on the porch boards, and she felt him come to stand beside her. The rider at the head of the column, a weathered man with gray in his beard and something ancient and steady in his eyes, swung off his bike and walked toward them. He looked at Cole first, a long, measuring look that seemed to take inventory of every wound and confirmed that the man inside the wounds was still intact. Then he turned to Lena. He held out his hand. "Marcus Webb, President Iron Brotherhood MC, National Chapter." She shook it. "We owe you a debt that doesn't have a bottom," he said quietly. "Cole is family. You pulled him out of the dark. That makes you family too." She didn't trust herself to speak. She nodded once, the way her father had nodded when words were insufficient. Marcus Webb reached into his vest and produced something. A small patch, black and silver, hand-stitched, with an image she recognized immediately. A wolf's head, rendered in clean, fierce lines. "The brothers voted last night," he said. "Riding. Unanimous." He held it out to her. "Wolf girl," he said. "You've earned the road name." Behind her, 112 riders began to clap. Not wildly, not with noise or ceremony, but steadily, rhythmically, the way people acknowledge something real. Lena Carter, 17 years old, daughter of Ray Carter, child of Dustfall Ridge, stood in the cold Wyoming morning and felt the loneliness break apart inside her like ice in a spring river. She hadn't known she was still carrying it until it was gone. The Iron Brotherhood stayed 3 days. They handled the black vultures the way experienced men handled disorganized ones, swiftly, legally, and with the kind of quiet authority that doesn't require a single act of violence. Warrants were filed. Witnesses came forward. 2 of the riders who had run Cole off the road were arrested before the week was out. The rest of the black vultures, faced with the collective gaze of the entire Iron Brotherhood, dissolved like smoke. Before they left, The brothers did something Lena hadn't asked for and couldn't have imagined. They fixed things. They re-roofed the cabin's damaged eastern corner. They serviced the rusted truck until it ran cleanly for the first time in 2 years. They restocked her firewood, her food stores, her ammunition. One man, who turned out to be a licensed electrician, repaired the cabin's wiring in 3 hours and installed a proper backup generator. They worked in near silence, with the focused, purposeful energy of people who express care through action rather than words. Cole found her on the last morning, sitting on the porch steps, watching the sunrise paint the ridge gold and amber. He sat beside her, moving carefully around his healing ribs, and for a while neither of them said anything. "My father built this porch," Lena said finally. "He built it well," Cole replied. A long pause. "I don't know how to have people," she said quietly. It was the most honest thing she'd said in 14 months. "I forgot." Cole looked out at the ridge. "Brotherhood isn't something you learn," he said. "It's something you recognize. You already had it in you. That's why you ran toward the sound instead of away from it." She thought about that for a long time after they were gone, after the last engine note faded down the mountain road and the ridge returned to its ancient, breathing silence. But the silence felt different now. It felt inhabited. It felt like it contained something it hadn't contained before. Connection, unseen but permanent. The knowledge that somewhere on the roads, 100 people knew her name and would answer if she called. She went inside. She made coffee. She sat by the window and looked out at her father's mountain. And for the first time in 14 months, she felt him there too. Not as a grief, but as a presence. As if he were sitting just out of sight in the trees the way he always used to, patient and still, watching her with those quiet eyes that always told her the same thing without words. "You're doing fine, kid. You're doing just fine." In a world that teaches us to look away, Lena Carter looked toward. In a world that rewards caution, she chose courage. In a world that made her alone, she chose to act as though she was not, and in doing so, she created the very connection she had been missing. The most powerful truth in this story is one we already know, but easily forget. Family is not only blood, and belonging is not only birthright. The people who show up in your darkest hour, the ones who ride through the night, who fix your roof without being asked, who give you a name that means something, those people are chosen. And that kind of choosing is its own sacred thing. Lena didn't become Wolf Girl because someone gave her a title. She became Wolf Girl the moment she stepped off that porch and ran into the dark.